Stand up and be counted. All this and more coming up on This Week in Retro.
High-resolution color graphics.
This land of high technology.
The revolution in technology that made the information age possible.
Those kids are not afraid of computers.
Arcade 2-Up. The end of Arcade 1-Up, but what's next?
Sad duties to inform. It's the passing of a Sega icon and the end of the line for some significant infrastructure technologies.
Is bigger better? It's mini arcade machines.
And a look back at the early 1970s, along with new hope for old laptop expansions coming up on this Arcade Spectacular Week show for the week of Saturday, the 17th of January, 2026.
Up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm good, Dave.
Caffeinated better. Thank you, Dave.
I have been not very well, but I'm fine now. I'm finally today feeling good. I've got lots of things to do. I'm going to do some stuff with my Commodore 64 this week. I'm going to get it set up. I'm going to have got a little SD card coming for it that I'm put in there and set up the internal storage. I'm all excited about that. You doing anything retro this week?
We were casting a production of Measure for Measure. That's pretty retro, 425 odd years ago.
Nice.
Yeah. Are you in a high score challenge, Chris?
Oh, don't talk to me about don't talk to me about Shinobi. Let's move on from yes, I am. It's Shinobi, not doing very well. My son Luke has pushed me and said, when are we getting back into Sphinx Avenger? So we're planning on streaming our second dive into Sphinx Avenger on the 24th of January. So
24th of January, so that's not long after this is broadcast. So today will be the 17th, so it's a week today.
Yeah.
Sphinx Adventure.
I hope we finish it so that we never have to load that game again.
I like that the one text adventure you keep going back to is a really bad one.
It's the only one I really played as a kid, so therefore I have to. There's unfinished business, right? It has to be done.
Business is a huge thing.
Yeah.
Talking about things we did as kids, something I've never gone into much depth on in the show is my own origin story. Why I'm sitting here now talking to all of you lovely people. And something happened around Christmas that was amazing. It awakened memories that I'd forgotten about for 40 years. And I want to thank Kerbeco, or Mark, as he's actually really called, for doing this. And he did do it for me because he knew it meant something to me. When I was a little boy, my parents didn't have a lot of money. So our holidays were driving down from Lanarkshire in Scotland to Lancashire in England. Two different places, even if they do sound the same. We would always go to St. Anne's. It's a place just outside of Blackpool. It's a bit quieter and nicer than Blackpool. And we would always stay in the Fernley Hotel, which was a bit of a complex. There was a swimming pool in there, and there was games rooms and all sorts of things. And that's what got me hooked, because the hotel had arcade cabinets in it. It had, throughout the years, it had a sit-down Star Wars. It had a cocktail Donkey Kong that was broken and you could give yourself free credits on. It had a Mr. Do. It had a Berserk. At one point, it had a Zybots, which is sort of Gauntlet 3. And various other machines that went through the years. I'd hang about them. Usually without the 10p, I would need to play them because I would, as soon as I had money, I would spend it. And other kids would do the same. And when someone did have 10p, we'd watch them play the games. But that's not all. Further along the road was a magical place. And it was an arcade called St. Anne's Pier. So it was a pier that went out onto the beach. And there was a huge, actually it wasn't huge, but in my kid's memory, this massive world, this other realm full of penny pushers, puggies, and of course, arcade machines. And
hang on. American check. What is a puggy?
A puggy is a gambling machine.
Oh, okay.
So, a fruit machine.
Yeah,
sure.
Fruit machine, one-arm bandit without the one arm.
Gotcha.
So a puggy. I don't even know if that's a Scottish thing. Or
it might be, because in England we call them fruit machines. Yeah.
We call them fruit machines here, but also puggies.
Yeah.
I'm just going to play the puggy. We'd go there every night, and I'd spend every coin my parents would give me and then beg for more. And that's where it all started for me. Long before I got my Amstrad CPC, long before that, I was playing on Berserk or Mr. Do or all these various different machines there. Now, Mark grew up in St. Anne's, And he knew I'd been there. So he was down there at Christmas and he took some pictures for me. And I couldn't be more grateful when I saw the sign above the pier entrance and saw inside it. It took me right back there to somewhere I've not been probably for 40 years. So that was absolutely special for me. And it kind of linked to the story I'm going to talk about just now. Around Christmas time, there was some bad news with perhaps a silver lining, which I'll come to. I'll tell you why I've got a hope of a silver lining later on, but some bad news. Arcade 1UP have closed. Now, this is a company who feel like they've been around forever, but they only actually started selling arcade cabinets in 2018 when they won a Walmart tender to do it. They made inexpensive, flat-packed arcade cabinets. Think IKEA, flat-pack, you bring it home, you build it. It would have an inexpensive system and a chip-based board inside and a small flat-screen monitor. And the initial ones, I personally think, were too small to be taken seriously. They were less than 4 feet tall, so 115 centimetres tall. That's 2 foot or 60 centimetres shorter than a normal full-size arcade machine. So if you're standing at a normal arcade machine and looking at it, imagine the screen was 2 foot, 60 centimetres shorter. It's not usable. They did have, of course, an add-on riser. So that would take them up to 5 foot tall. So this would be a block that went underneath them and took them up 30 centimetres, a foot in height. And that made them, I think, more usable. But I think you needed to be sitting down on a stool to use them. It's clear, though, that they were aiming for a price point that would let people who were out doing the shopping buy one of these on impulse. And in fact, since it was a Walmart tender that they won, they would obviously be aiming for a particular price point that Walmart felt they needed. Now, you do get what you pay for. The initial ones, there was no shark fin side to it, so it didn't come out at the side, which meant that you're sitting at them, you didn't have your knees underneath the control panel, it was just flat. And 3 years later, in 2020, they decided to change the design to add the shark fin, and they called that the Legacy Edition. Still the same height, though, and still with a riser. And 3 years after that, in 2023, they got rid of risers entirely and made the cabinets taller. So 5 foot tall, integrating the riser. And these are called the Deluxe. They're still the same 19 inches wide rather than usually kind of 28 inches wide that you would get from a normal two-player arcade cab. So they are much narrower. And they did eventually do a more premium range, the XL or the Pro range in smaller numbers. The XL was through Costco in the USA, and the Pro was limited edition at a much higher price. And these are only a few inches smaller than a normal arcade cab. And I would say, unless you put them side by side, they just wouldn't look small. They marketed these as 95% size, although why would you not just say 100? Why just do that? Why would you take that 5% away? I don't know. But guys, were you ever tempted by 1UP?
I was tempted, especially when they did the Outrun one, and then you had the optional seat extension and stuff, and also the Star Wars one. And again, people were doing full-size cockpit additions to them. I think Perifractic did that on his channel. And I think, didn't they also do one with, didn't they do a Capcom one with Street Fighter 2 and a few other games loaded on that? So I was tempted, but they were at one of those price points where for what you got, it wasn't too expensive, but it also wasn't too cheap. So it was sort of, it was probably well priced, to be honest. But for me and how I spend money, it was like, oh, that's tempting, but not tempting enough to spend that much. So I didn't get one. And hearing this story, I'm kind of gutted, actually, that I didn't. Especially the Star Wars one. The Star Wars one, I think, looks great. Yeah.
I think the attraction for me with them was the machines that you couldn't just do yourself with a joystick, like the steering wheel or particularly the yoke from Star Wars. What do you think, Jason?
Yeah, shout out to Amber and Tony because I'd played a couple of these at their house, and I was tempted after having the chance to spend some time with them. But speaking of Zybots, as you were earlier, I actually in my previous home I had a stand-up Zybots, classic in there, and yeah, I mean, there's a difference between that and a multi-cade kind of thing versus my beat up old Zybots, which had one wonky controller and the monitor going out of alignment. But I think I've learned enough about myself from that experience that I knew my game playing habits weren't going to change enough to really warrant the money or the square footage to turn over to one or two arcade one-up machines. There's some mythic, but if I could get something that had the spinner for Tron and had the this for this and had the this for this, then maybe I'd do it. But I knew like this was probably not gonna pan out in my favor.
So I'd seen before the end of the year that this was happening, but I wanted to leave it until the dust settled. And I'm glad I did, because we can actually talk about it and be informative of what's happening next rather than just say, looks like they might be closing. So Elk 1984 submitted a couple of links to the subreddit around the 12th of December. And this was when the initial rumours came out of an email going out to one-up staff saying it was their final day. And at that point, it was just a rumour. It wasn't an official announcement. But on the 16th of December, Tastemakers, which is the company that owns one-up, and Basic Fun, which has an exclamation mark, announced that one-up is over and that Basic Fun are taking on the majority of the operations. So Basic Fun are a huge toy company. So Care Bears, Tonka, Kinex, Light Bright, etc. So much bigger than Tastemakers ever were. So they're in a position where they could financially back one-up if they choose to. I mean, who knows what will happen? You hear about these acquisitions where companies buy a brand in and then it doesn't quite work for them, and a few years later they kill it off. But hopefully that won't happen here. They haven't, however, taken on the staff, sadly, so they've all been made redundant. And not everything has been taken on, and I believe that's because they didn't want to take on the debt, or also the apparent legal problems that were supposedly looming. There were apparently legal disputes that Arcade One-Up had coming, and obviously they have decided not to take on the bits that would get that. But they are taking on product support, and they're going to release new products. And this is where it gets interesting. They're going to focus on the higher end stuff, the Pro XL stuff. And I think I can explain why, because I've got my opinions on Arcade One-Up. I think loads of the cheap Arcade One-Up units have been sold. And if you look on eBay, even in the UK, which isn't the primary market, there's loads of them available. And I think they've sold probably as many as they can because they're now competing with themselves for second hand. And I also think that I would argue that some people will get these home. They'll build this flat pack arcade that they bought on a whim when they were in Walmart or Costco or whatever. They'll build this flat pack arcade and they might not use it that much, as Jason didn't do with his iBots, for the sounds of things. Might not use it that much. And eventually they'll say, do you know what, I want rid of this now. I want the space back, because they do take up space. And I think unless they are making arcade machines that are more geared at being brilliant, in other words, I love my arcade machine, it's so good, rather than I saw it in Walmart for $350 and I had to have it, then I think that's where there's potential to succeed. So I think if they're going to succeed under the new management, they will need to sell arcade cabinets that people are going to be happy with, people are going to be delighted with for years. And I know that plenty of Arcade One-Up people are. People have bought these things and they have upgraded them. They've changed out the joysticks. They've added in their own Mister, for example, or Pi. They've changed out the monitors. All sorts of things you can do to it. So I would hope that they will produce arcade machines that are a starting point for people that'll be happy with them afterwards. What do you think, guys?
I think retail is brutal, and if ever you think that you've got an idea for a fantastic product to sell into retail, be very wary, because even like Dave said, Arcade One-Up really seemed like a company that had been around forever. It seemed like it was doing well, especially around Christmas time. You'd always see their machines stacked high. Whatever, retail is brutal.
They were a bit interesting in retail over here, because I'm trying to think where I actually saw them. And JB Hi-Fi is a big electronic retailer over here. I think they did have some in store, but then it sort of pushed to you could order them through JB Hi-Fi, but they didn't have them in store. So it wasn't sort of that impulse buy. You had to sort of commit to, well, I'm going to pay this money and assume something's going to come in the post from another vendor. And some people aren't comfortable with that, myself included. I think I do hope this does go forward, like you say, Dave, and it is reassuring if they're going for the Pro XL stuff. Because one of the drawbacks of anything smaller than full size is if you've got a full size cabinet or a full size main cupboard or whatever, and you throw an arcade one up next to it, instantly the arcade one up looks too small, right?
Yeah.
So if you're in that kind of market, you've already got some machines and you just want this because, like you say, it's Star Wars, it's too expensive to buy a real one, keep the vector display working, have the controller and all of that. This is a good alternative. But if it doesn't match the size of anything else in your collection, then it just looks out of place. Unless you just got a garage full of low boys, I guess. So, yeah, mate, hopefully it goes forward with that.
How's your arcade cab? You haven't mentioned it for a while.
Do you know what? I have not done, which is why I haven't done an update on it. I've not done a thing to it because I just play it, right? So it's still there. It's in the garage. When there's a high score challenge on, I just go in the garage. It's a nice way to unwind after work and just load up whatever game of the month we're playing and I just play it. So I don't feel the need to, shall I put stickers on the side of it? I need to tidy up where I've put electrical tape around the edge. I do need to clean it up, but I'd rather spend my time just playing it. And there's nothing about it that makes me think this is too shabby to play on, because it's not. It just works. And it puts a smile on my face.
For anyone who doesn't know, Chris managed to rescue an arcade cabinet for almost nothing and has ended up with his fantastic garage machine.
Yeah, so it's just a main cab. Yeah, just a main cab. Yeah. At a tip shop.
Yeah, a tip shop. As for me, I have been thinking about getting arcade cabinets again. The big thing for me, though, is a lack of a CRT. That's the red line. Without a CRT, I don't think I'd want to. So when my loft finally gets done and my garage, the other half of my garage is converted, I think I've got room for 2 arcade cabinets, one with the horizontal monitor and one with a vertical monitor, so I can play most things. But maybe more on that later on, because we're going to talk more about arcade machines throughout this whole show. We are sponsored this week by Pixel Addict magazine. Pixel Addict is a monthly magazine that comes out every week, assuming that week is a 6-week. The strapline across the top says Britain's breast selling. I mean, they don't sell.
Maybe.
Well, I buy it.
That's what it says across Chris's T-shirt. It says it's the breast-selling Amiga Addict magazine on Chris's breast.
Selling tech history magazine, and the new issue 32, has the usual wonderful artwork, and it's the death of dial-up. And the headline story is the screeching symphony of dial-up era ending, revisiting the dawn of the public internet and pioneering ISPs that brought it into our homes. But there's lots more there. They've sat down with the editors of ST Amiga format, so Simon Williams and Ben Taylor, to talk about the 40th anniversaries of the Atari ST and the Amiga. Loads more in Pixel Addict. If you wanted to get a copy of Pixel Addict, what would you do?
You'd go to addict.media and you could sign up for individual issues or even get your annual subscription from as little as 75p per week.
You can get it delivered to your house, or you can get a digital copy. Get it delivered to your house, though. Thank you for sponsoring us.
We try to focus on positive developments here in Retro, but some passages and endings deserve our focused attention, and so I have some sad duties to perform this week. The first is to share the news that's been propagating throughout the video game world that David Rosen, who was a decades-long fixture at Sega and can fairly be considered as both a co-founder and an essential figure in its growth and evolution, passed away on Christmas 2025. That story was posted to our subreddit by Uncommitted Logic, and it led to a detailed obituary from The Guardian, and I've pulled in multiple other sources to help frame Rosen's accomplishments. For those of you already deeply familiar with Sega history, much of this will be review, but for me, every time I read up on Sega history, I learn something big and surprising and new. So David Rosen was a U.S. Air Force pilot based in Japan during the 1950s, and after his service, he decided to put down personal and business roots there, and through his company, Rosen Entertainments, he became a fixture in the photo booth, pinball, and other coin-operated novelty business segments. His business was just one of many that was trading in coin-op machines in the Pacific during those years, and as Japanese consumer tastes and disposable income grew, there were opportunities to combine. In parallel with Rosen Enterprises was a company which had once been named Service Games. That's 2 words that start with an S and an E and a G and an A, and we'll come back to that in a minute. Anyway, Service Games was also founded by Americans, but in 1960, it reforms as 2 separate outfits, one of which is a coin-op distributor called Nippon Goraku Busan. And when Rosen works a merger between his company and that one, they decide to rebrand around the old Service Games name, but embrace the punchy abbreviation Sega, specifically Sega Enterprises Limited. So when did you guys become aware of just the sheer scope and historical roots of Sega?
Oh, it's a recent thing. I thought they were just Sonic the Hedgehog until I found out about this stuff. And it's weird. They're a Japanese company, but they're not. They've got American roots because of World War II and so on. Fascinating stuff. Nintendo's the same as well. I mean, the Nintendo playing cards. But yeah, I didn't know about it until I started into retro and started to find out all these things. And like you, there's always something else you find out.
Yeah, Nintendo, an even older company, but yes, you know, the Service Games origin, those guys who they were serving there, World War II, Korean War. Yep. Chris?
For me, it was when you introduced the story, Jason. And you just gave the rundown. I didn't know any of that, so that's really cool to know.
Okay, interesting. So this bigger company turns into a prominent manufacturer of all things coin-op in that pre-video game era. Coin-op skill and action games, jukeboxes, slot machines, more. I guess, wait, now I know. What was the term, Dave? I've already... Puggies?
Puggies.
Fruit machines, yeah, slot machines, puggies. So apparently the word Sega had already become synonymous with either jukeboxes or slot machines, the way that, same way that everybody's grandmother still calls a game console a Nintendo. So just 5 years after that big combination, the American conglomerate Gulf and Western takes a majority ownership stake in Sega Enterprises Limited. And that's a fact that always blows my mind every time I see it, because I think a lot of people assume that the overlap between old and new media is a relatively new phenomenon. But look at this. This is Sega and Paramount Pictures that are under the same ownership all the way back in 1970. So we're talking shortly after the original Star Trek has left the air and before the film The Godfather goes into production. That's how long ago a film company and a video game company, or what would become a video game company, were under the same ownership. So Rosen is heavily credited with being part of Sega's push into both coin-op video games and home consoles, right down to apparently being responsible for pushing for the Genesis name for the 16-bit console in North America. He also helped guide Sega through the choppy waters of the early 1980s, shifted a number of key assets over to Bally Manufacturing ownership, and then taking the remaining Sega Enterprises Limited back over from Gulf and Western in 1984. He becomes the chairman of the newly independent company. At his passing, David Rosen was 95 years old. Now, there are many, many other twists and turns to follow before Rosen took his well-deserved retirement in 1996. There's an account on Bluesky called Play History that's run by the gaming researcher Ethan Johnson. And Johnson posted a large thread as part of the Rosen Memorials to try to break down the extremely complicated history of Sega. I will not and have not tried to replicate or perfectly summarize that history there. It is worth a read, though, to follow that, the fact that there's rarely a straight line between 2 points. And I got to say, there's one tricky moment where Johnson has accidentally transposed the first names of the two founders of the original Service Games Japan company. So nobody's perfect. This is actually really hard to get right. Anything to add on kind of your take on this long and winding road that Sega's been down?
Yes, it is interesting. And in terms of Sega versus Nintendo, which is the inevitable comparison, I always felt Sega were the slightly less polished but more interesting company. And it is a shame that we lost them for hardware development around 20 years ago. They just stopped doing the hardware. They still exist. They're still a big company. They've got $3 billion turnover, I think 8,000 staff or something. But most of that is from existing franchises they have through various software houses that they own. And I just don't see the Sega name front and center when I think about those games. I'm sure it pops up when you launch the games on the NVIDIA and Sega and all the rest of the things that pop up. But Sega just don't, they are around, but they just don't feel the same way that they ever did. They just don't seem to be a big name anymore.
I think the polish thing that might be like, even going back to the stand-up arcade game days, I think that Sega was always more willing to try something, and if it failed, move on, whereas Nintendo has been much more, we're going to get this right, which also means that when Nintendo does a faceplant, Virtual Boy and so forth, we really want to point and laugh because see, you guys tried to control the narrative and you still blew it.
Yeah, but Sega, the arcade stuff, the super scaler stuff, Outrun, for example, I know That's
Oh, good. We've mentioned Outrun in every story
Yeah.
of this episode.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I wanted to bring it in just to annoy you, Jason.
Yeah,
Outrun.
thank you. Mission accomplished. Chris,
Racing
what Outrun based?
now.
I wonder if Outrun will come up again later. It's interesting what you say there about, actually, Dave, about Sega. It's still producing games, but you don't necessarily associate those games with Sega, because the same thing happened with Atari. Like if I said Unreal Tournament 2004, you wouldn't think about Atari, but their name is all over that product, right?
Yeah.
So anyway. No, Sega, though, for a period in the 80s and 90s for me anyway, it just seemed like every major arcade game or every game you wanted to throw your money into was a Sega title.
Like what?
And like Afterburner, Outrun, you got Space Harrier, G-Lock, and then you got the virtual games that came after that, Virtua Racer, Virtua Fighter, all of those. So, and obviously you wanted to play the home ports of those games as well. And also in the 8 and the 16-bit console wars, for me, and again, like yourself, Dave, you have to compare them to Nintendo, but Nintendo always felt a little bit childish. And this is maybe because of the age where I was. And the consoles just had a bit of a different design language to them. Whereas Sega clearly marketed towards, I feel anyway, the sort of rebellious teenager in the gaming market at the time. They just seemed a bit more edgy and a bit more fun in that way. So, yeah.
Yeah, and there's a whole other avenue of history to go down in why conglomerates like Gulf and Western came to be in the 60s and 70s. Much like back in that Texas Instruments story, where understanding interest rates is essential to understanding why certain things happen. Understanding corporate and personal tax codes in the U.S. Really helps explain why you get conglomerates in the 70s. Yeah, Dave.
Did you come across an explanation of why Sega used a different pronunciation for their name in different territories? For example, in Australia, it's Sega, and in other places, it's Sega, Sega. Did you?
I did not. I didn't dig into that, but I guess I would mentally file that under the same category as in the U.S. we call the car company Mazda, but in Canada they call it Mazda. So yeah. I think that's just
Do Mazda themselves call it Mazda? And
I mean, that's what Mazda/Mazda commercials call them. Yeah.
Okay. So the same thing. Okay. Strange.
Yeah. Well, different alphabets and different ways of transliterating, I'm sure. Let us know in the subreddit how and why this came to be. There were another couple of significant endings that were discussed this week on our subreddit. Antiques for Geeks alerts us to an article from The Register. Chris and I were just talking about the Spectrum and the A1200 and so forth, so maybe we have to treat The Register the same way. Anyway, article in The Register covering the end of life for Hewlett-Packard's variant of the Unix operating system, dubbed HPUX. Now, Hewlett-Packard isn't what it used to be either, but the company that now calls itself HPE has been supporting this operating system that was first published in 1982. HPUX has been updated several times across a variety of processors, including multiple flavors of HP Silicon, as well as the Motorola 68000 and Intel Itanium lines. But HP/HPE is well out of the CPU business. Intel discontinued Itanium production years ago, so the life of HPUX was pretty much going to be limited by how many organizations wanted to keep paying long-term support contracts. And as Tom Halwerda of OS News remarked, quote, HPUX doesn't carry the movie star status of IRIX, nor the benefits of being available as both open source and on commodity hardware as Solaris, so far fewer people have any experience with it or have developed a fondness for it. HPUX didn't star in a Steven Spielberg blockbuster. It didn't leave behind influential technologies like ZFS. Despite being supported until today, it's mostly forgotten, and not even HPE itself seems to care. And that makes me sad, unquote.
Makes me sad as well, the way he's worded it.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
Yeah. Wistful about an industrial Unix, but hey. And finally, G7VFY shared another piece from The Register, noting that Microsoft has disabled metadata services to Windows Media Player. Now, that's the service which pops up and tells you the title and the band and the track names of whatever CD happens to be in your drive. You know, the compact discs that we all put in our computers to play music with. Clearly, now that far fewer machines ship with optical drives at all, and the general downward spiral of optical disc sales, this was a change that they expected few to notice. There are certainly plenty of free and freely available services out there to keep the metadata flowing, but Microsoft pulling the plug on a service that was once a standard part of, I guess we'll call it multimedia plumbing, is just another sign of the progressing obsolescence, or should I call it retrofication, of physical media. Want to welcome on a new Patreon member. Luminal Spoon was a pal and took advantage of our new annual subscription option. So thank you. If you want to join Luminal Spoon in that annual support, where would you go?
Patreon.com/thisweekinretro.
And lots of housekeeping on this racing game podcast. Yes, thank you to everybody who told me on YouTube and Reddit and Bluesky and Twitter and Smoke Signals and everywhere else. There was a stunt track racer in North America. I was mistaken. It completely got past me. I should have looked it up last week because I knew Chris was talking about Stunt Car Racer. I was just like, I don't think this really happened. I beg your pardon. There definitely was Stunt Track Racer in North America based on Jeff Crammon's Stunt Car Racer. You can please stop telling me now.
Oh, so it did have a different name.
We're not encyclopedias, and we're speaking off the cuff, so we're not going to get everything right.
In fairness, that was something I could have quickly looked at. It was easy for lots of people to find. I just was really sure it was just one of those UK titles that never made the jump. So that's on me as well. But it is on you now to please stop telling me. Yes, thank you to those who pointed out we weren't sure about Driller and Total Eclipse and all that. You can play the Freescape games in Scum VM of all places. I would not.
Yeah, not the place you would think to play it, but no. Scum. Anything you can play in Scum VM tends to be the best place to play it. It tends to answer all the questions you had about it, and so I'd imagine Driller and Total Eclipse and so on are fantastic in there, and that's where I'm going to turn next time when I game a Castle Master. I will try Scum VM and see how good they are.
And as a follow-up to my story about trying to fix up old browsers, Mr. Giado mentioned on YouTube that even if you fix the proxy issues and so forth, there are still other potential problems. Quote, a less obvious issue with using old browser is that Cloudflare blocks them. So even if a particular website is 1995 friendly, it will mean nothing if you can't even browse to it before getting a rejection notice. End quote. So yeah, the internet infrastructure is a bit different than it was in the mid-1990s. So there are some intermediaries and content distribution networks and so forth that if they see something they don't like, they may throw you one of those prove you're human challenges or just reject your browser agent outright. So it is possible that even if you can get an old browser connected through a valid pipeline, that there's going to be some other issues getting to sites. So thanks for pointing out that additional wrinkle.
There you go. While we're doing some housekeeping, Jason, I've got a question for you. In fact, this was put in the comments of the YouTube version of the podcast last week by the Twisted Sock 3253. He says, you are in a racing car. A long straight section of track extends into the distance. Do you, A, brake, B, accelerate, or C, attack the orc? I think that's aimed at you, Jason.
I guess so. I will choose to accelerate and see where that takes us. Speaking of, Ben One Music pointed out on Bluesky just before we started recording that the titles ASCII Cars, Speed Racer, and The Debt are 3 examples of racing-based text adventures. I think the latter was never completed, but there's a long kind of development thread about it. But yes, there are, in fact, racing-based text adventures out there. I
said last week that if you wanted to play RS-232 games, null modem games on your Amiga or your Atari ST, you can just do it through Amiga Live. And I was wrong to say that. Turns out you can't. George T602 says you can't do it. And that's quite right. Amiga Live says you can't do it. And it has to be the same one. I did have a look to see if there is a way around it. And there is. But I don't think it'll be a good way. UAE does allow you to make the serial port on the internet, but I imagine your firewall will conflict with that and you'll have all sorts of configuration problems, but it is at least possible to do it. So you can connect your serial port across the internet and the UAE the emulation won't know any difference. So it is possible to do that away, but there's no, as far as I know, there's no nice UI bundled up friendly way to do it with a wizard.
I think that's a gap. I think it's the last piece of emulation that needs to be fixed, not just in software emulation on a PC, but maybe in these little devices like the A1200 and stuff like that. They always miss out the link function. Maybe the market's too small. Maybe is it not worth doing just because I want to play Neil at Falcon from the other side of the world? And I think
the firewall's going to fight with it, and they're going to have all sorts of support requests. So it's going to be this much work for this much game
for just me and Neil, basically. And I think, but I do think it's having a ping of around 2,000 milliseconds, which is probably what it would actually be on par with an RS-232 connection anyway.
Perhaps. On to news in brief. Squelch 411 lets us know about another Pico project. This one is Pico PCMCIA. And it's PCMCIA is a laptop expansion that we had for a while, although also present in some Amigas. I'm not sure this is for Amigas though. And it goes into laptops as the single expansion slot they have. And Pico PCMCIA provides you with various things: Wi-Fi, CD-ROM, Sound Blaster, Gravis Ultrasound, even MP401 MIDI, and IDE emulation is planned in the future. So this is another Pico-based project which does a kind of a Swiss Army knife of expansions that are difficult to get hold of or difficult to put together. And it's done by Kevin Moonlight, and I know he's in the same place as Polpo and Freddie V, who do other projects, so I'd imagine this is part of a collaboration to some degree there as well.
Do you guys remember what that acronym expands to?
PCMCIA. PC, Modem, and Central Investigation Agency.
So close.
Sounds legit.
It expands to People Can't Memorize Computer Industry Acronyms.
Really?
Yep.
No.
I think I would know that. I've never seen that before.
Yep.
How did we forget?
Eventually they gave up on that and started calling it PC card, and then we just put everything on USB. But yep.
Who signed off on that?
That's hilarious.
The tech industry of the 90s. Salem OK posted some Dave bait. It was a piece, a video on the Amstrad GX4000, and it said, the GX4000 is the best 8-bit console, bar none. It's a video from Chiropolis titled, This Terrible Console Might Not Be So Terrible After All.
Yeah, Dave is right, I think he said.
Yeah.
Probably.
Maybe.
Yeah.
It's not uncommon to be offered old computers for free these days, but G7VFY links us to a BBC archive video from 1972 where a computer is being given away for free to a good home. The catch is that it's massive and it needs air conditioning and dedicated power supplies, etc. And it costs. It originally cost £150,000 in 1964 and was worth £25 of scrap in 1972. So we're talking a massive mainframe, tape to tape, punch card reader, the whole works. Yeah. Put it in your garage. Put it in your loft, Dave.
Pajako links us to an Amiga mouse pointer archive, and I thought this was going to be rubbish till I clicked on it. It's actually pretty cool. There's loads and loads of them. I mean, more than you could ever imagine, and you can filter by theme, and they're all arranged in a sort of neat pattern. It's a nice way to browse through them. Quite interesting. Thank you, Pajako.
And there was another BBC archive clip, this one from 1999, featuring, among other presenters, Charlie Brooker, who went on to become the man behind Black Mirror. It does have some this is 1999 zooming in and out youth TV feel, but is an interesting watch. They keep calling classic computers game consoles, but other than that, still interesting seeing what was retro in 1999. Thank you to Various Hunt 9110.
Bono Music links us to TechBlog, which talks about a clever spike trick on the Amiga that used the copper to turn the 8 hardware sprites into much more, and in some cases more than the SNES could do, a console designed to do much more than the Amiga.
And to join Ben One Music and all those others in submitting stories, head over to our subreddit, reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro.
Yeah, loads more to see.
Is yours small or full size, guys?
Mine's just for function.
Fair enough. Jason?
Is Reese still available to take a long-term host substitution spot on the show? I'm not asking for me. I'm asking for you.
Oh, asking for me to replace me. Yeah. Look, moving on. Mine's so big it has to live in the garage. We are, of course, talking about arcade cabs. And thanks to Magical Mike, for sharing a clip by YouTuber Gen X Grown Up. There is hope for anyone who can't take a big one.
Sorry. Who wrote this.
I know I did.
Yep.
I thought I'd be able to get through that. John was at the My Arcade Retro stand at CES 2026, and unlike the stand showing how AI dolls can improve your home life, My Arcade Retro was showing off some yet to be released but possibly fully licensed mini arcade cabs. And when I say mini, I mean it's basically a nice usable sized joystick, but on the back of that there's a sort of pretend arcade cab, and you're going to need those reading glasses you've been trying to convince yourself you don't need yet in order to see the 3.5 inch screen. That's how small these devices actually are. The games on display include Sonic, Outrun, complete with steering wheel, Shinobi, Golden Axe, and Streets of Rage. John guesses that these may ship in April 2026. I can't help but note that the Outrun minicab features the modified car sprite that Nintendo had to use for the 3DS version of Outrun. So it's not actually a Ferrari Testarossa. So it's not Outrun. So you can count that one out. You might still want it, but for me, that's a no-go. That's not My Arcade Retro's fault. Oh, sorry, Dave. You had something?
Yeah. Sonic,
Yep.
Streets of Rage, and Nintendo version of Outrun. These are console games made to look like arcades, aren't they?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, these are the Mega Drive / Genesis ports of the games. Yeah. So they're not arcade ROMs. Yeah.
Even worse. Even worse.
We're so hard to please, aren't we? Going back to the Outrun one, though, and as was the case for the 3DS, that's not My Arcade Retro's fault. That's not Sega's fault. That is 100% Ferrari's fault. They are very protective of their licensing. Looking on My Arcade Retro's Amazon site, the story gets a bit more interesting. You can buy in mini arcade form. Sonic already is out. Pac-Man, Casino Player, Galaga, a couple of Capcom units with different games, Miss Pac-Man. They're also selling some Atari handheld systems and Pole Position, again with the steering wheel. So it looks like they've used their existing Pole Position mini cab to produce the Outrun one. It's sort of the same design. Sorry, Jason, there's no text adventure version of that yet. So yeah, you have to wait for that.
How dare you, Chris? How dare you, in an episode that has wedged Outrun into all three feature segments, come after me for? I don't try to insert text adventures into every conversation. Do you see me on the show try to insert text adventures into every conversation? No, I'm not that guy. I am not the Outrun guy. All right, let's draw a clear line between who's trying to wedge what into every segment of a show. I do not do that.
Chris likes talking about Outrun. I just like winding up Jason. And Jason doesn't care for Outrun quite so much.
What about a point-and-click version of Outrun? Do you think that would be a go? Anyway, they mostly look to be around the 80 Australian dollar mark. That's what the website was obviously feeding me. So let's call it roughly 40 quid. Guys, mini arcades, would you collect these, Jason?
All right, yes. So if you are playing the home version of This Week in Retro and you had the 3-point secret objective to get Outrun mentioned in every feature, congratulations, you're 3 points closer to your victory. Chris, do you get to evolve into a new Pokemon form now that this has happened? I want there to be some payoff for you. You emerge from an egg and you have to use superpowers.
I get special powers or something. Yeah. I get the ability to play a point-and-click adventure.
Yeah, I was looking around earlier trying to find it. I have an older, it's got to be from, maybe it's from the Basic Fun people. I have a Centipede, which I believe is the Nintendo on a chip version. I was trying to find that. So no, I just have the one, and I'm not really interested in collecting these, but I do get why these things sell to people who aren't ready to commit to a big arcade one-up style affair, let alone a real MAME cabinet, or again, for Fend an old style arcade cabinet with a zillion-pound CRT and so forth, which Dave wants to put up in his loft to crush him later. I did note that you mentioned that generic casino model. I do wonder how well those sell compared to the specific arcade brands. 30 years ago, I would have guessed that the casino models would have dominated. I'm now less sure about that, but I bet they do sell quite well. And another thing that stands out about a number of the game titles that you mentioned is that these are the same games that have been showing up in direct-to-TV sticks for well over 20 years now. These have integrated screens and so forth, so it's a little different, but we are seeing a lot of the same properties being cycled through these types of consumer-graded games.
Yeah, I mean these 3.5-inch screen handhelds you get, they're quite common. I imagine these are just a handheld put into a slightly bigger case to make it these arcade machines. I don't think these are in any way a substitute for playing an arcade machine. I think these are Funko Pops with more of a function. At least they have a function though, and I'm told by people who have them that they can play them. You can have fun on it. It's I should perhaps set aside my snootiness about it all. They are fun to play. And I think you can have a line of these on a shelf and they would look very good. I think they would. But they're not for me. I have my arcade setup just now is a 21-inch Trinitron 3V and various different controllers with a Mr. Multi-system, and it's perfect. And the only upgrade for me would be to turn it into a proper arcade cabinet, and only if it ticked all the boxes, otherwise it wouldn't be an upgrade. I do have another arcade setup which has got my Star Wars yoke on it, and a flat screen. But yeah, I'm a bit of a perfectionist that way. I want things to be just right. So I was saying last week, I don't want to use my mobile phone to buy anything. I want to sit down a proper computer with a keyboard and mouse into it and a numeric pad. I can't use a keyboard without a numeric pad. So I'm not the target market for these. I'm funny and fussy, and I don't like these types of things. So I'm not there. But these things have been going around for a while. There's not new. There's loads of them going about. I know that Neil actually built his own mini arcade machines before they were a thing. But yeah, these are not for me.
And if you had the secret objective card of Neil being mentioned on this episode, you score 1 point.
Nice. Came up earlier, didn't he? Where I find these ones interesting is they're a bit of a caricature of an arcade, really, because they're like you say, there have been mini arcade units before, and they've been really nicely proportioned and almost sort of, one-to-one, not one-to-one, but you know what I mean, scaled down, accurate replicas of arcades, even with the light up coin slots and everything.
I know I've seen Clint on LGR with little arcade machines, and they actually do look. There's little coins he putting in with tweezers and so on. That was quite impressive. But I do want to also, I should have mentioned, I don't like this idea of console versions replacing the arcade versions. If you do a search for Golden Axe music, for example, it's the console versions you find first. Now, hang on, it's an arcade machine at heart. The console versions are all inferior ports of it. They shouldn't then become the definitive version of it. And that's what I find happens with these things, that you end up with it being the console version, the Nintendo or the Sega version, rather than the proper arcade version that was there. So I'm not happy with that happening. There you go. Another complaint from me.
Nah, fair enough.
What was it? What was it we were going to put on your lower third? Funny and fussy?
Funny and fussy, there you go. Funny, but not in a ha-ha way.
Yeah, fair enough.
Miserable.
But like I say, so those older ones, those older ones, the ones that are more scale replicas, they look great, but they're harder to play because the joystick and the buttons are tiny. Whereas I think what they've gone for in these ones is it's a usable size joystick and buttons, and then it goes into this caricature of what an arcade cabinet looks like. These kind of things, they kind of remind me of, and this doesn't require any space whatsoever, it reminds me of playing PSVR Astrobot, where completing levels in the different games that you've got as part of that virtual reality experience, you end up with this virtual room of trinkets that you get as sort of rewards. And part of that is these micro arcade cabs, and you can look around the room and your little Astrobots are in there. It's a little cutesy thing. Anyway, it's cute. It's also pointless. That said, to be fair, what's wrong with a shelf full of these things? We used to collect the LCD games back in the day, like Scramble and stuff like that. And this is better than those. Be aware, these are, as we've said before, they're mostly Mega Drive ports for the Sega titles. They're not arcade ROMs, according to John anyway. The best use I've seen for micro arcades was actually as a playable table number at a place called Robot Bun Cafe Factory in Midland, just down the road from me.
What, sorry?
Robot Bun Factory Cafe.
I thought you said bung.
No, bun. Lovely little retro-themed cafe, and yeah, your table number that you took back with you, so they'd know where to bring your cheese and ham toasty and your coffee, was a playable arcade cabinet with the number on the back. Good. It was really cool. Yeah, really nice little venue. Shame they've closed down due to a fire caused by a ram raid incident in the shop next door. And on that note, Palace Arcade Fremantle also shut down, as mentioned last year. but now also the Palace Arcade Victoria Park have closed down due to taking up an offer they couldn't refuse on the venue. The Northbridge Bar is still open though. So speaking of collecting arcade cabinets, Dave, they were putting all their arcade machines in storage from the Vic Park one, but they did say if anybody wants to make an offer on some of the cabs, that they were welcome to. I was very tempted to go down before Christmas, but I knew it would just be too much money. They had a full sit down Star Wars cab, Dave, not an arcade one up one, an actual one.
You got rid of
it was working. They had a original Space Invaders with the foreground graphic and everything. They had some nice cabs down there. But anyway,
I think there's 8 kidneys in your house.
How
many do you really need?
I don't know. Anyway, all these venues closing down. So much for me saying how well these venues were doing in Perth. I hope it's not my fault. I hope I haven't cursed them. But the good news is, though, if you want to play arcade games, you don't need a whole garage or a bar. You just need a shelf. It's time now for our community question of the week. And the question last week was, with the revival of the Sega channel, which brought with it some games which were exclusive to the platform, we asked, which platform do you wish you could conjure up 6 long-lost games for? So we're out of contest mode, I believe. Jason, do you want to read out the top answer?
Sure. Weeping Scorpion submitted Commodore 128, no contest, and I think that is a strong answer.
Yeah, that's got to be the best answer. I think realistically, because the Commodore 128 could do so much. We saw that with the Eye of the Beholder port, where you had dual screens. You had a map on one screen and the game on another for a game that you wouldn't think would be able to run on an 8-bit system. Yeah, incredible. Unless you meant the GX 4000.
Unless that. Sir Drexel, yep, that'll do. Yeah. Says the Virtual Boy. It didn't have many games and was unlike anything else before or since. That's a really good answer.
I think that's a solid answer. I don't have a lot of affection for the Virtual Boy, but I think that if you're going to say, hey, could we see another 6 games? I think that's a good choice.
That's nice. You did get the Tomitronic games. That's a similar premise. And I have seen it emulated really well using the Filter 3D glasses. It can be done on a PC, cool. The Virtual Boy. Yeah.
Fiskett says, I'd like to conjure up 6 long-lost games for the Unix console. There are only so many times you can hunt the Wumpus.
There's actually quite a few games in that BSD games package that you can get for a lot of systems. So dig a little deeper. But yeah, some interesting answers there that covered not a lot of overlap, a lot of everything from PS Vita back down to the Commodore 128.
I'm kind of not joking with the GX 4000. We did mention it earlier on. The GX 4000 didn't get very many games that were made for the GX 4000. At best, they were Amstrad games with a little bit of enhancement. So, yeah, that would be great. But it'd be the same for, Amiga AGA games. You could even say it for that. Because Amiga AGA games were a bit underwhelming in terms of they were still made for the original Amiga with here's your color gradients.
Yeah, here's some licorice all sorts in the background of Zool. Thanks for that.
Yeah. Atari STE, Atari Falcon, loads of things. Anyway, thank you for all the answers.
Yep.
Do we have a question for this week?
We do.
Jason,
I'll say it,
did you?
because I'm sure.
Yeah.
So we talked about how Sega went through a lot of transformations from electromechanical games to being a pure play software publisher today, and lots of consoles, handhelds, and stand-up arcades in between. What is your favorite era of Sega?
Very nice. Where would they go to respond to that question?
I would hope they would go to reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro. But you can say it in a much nicer brogue, Dave. So give them your version.
reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro.
That is more soothing.
Thank you very much for joining us this week, Twirlers. Hope you enjoyed the show. We will be back next week with even more stories. We don't know what it will be next week. So exciting. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
I'm waving.
We pretty much hit that simultaneously. That was good.
We're all waving.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Outrun.
This Week in Retro was written and presented by Chris from 005 AGIMA, Jason from the Retro Adventurers, and Dave. It was edited by me, Duncan Styles. The podcast version of the show is available through your favourite podcast app, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And the video version is available on the This Week in Retro YouTube channel.
Join our community subreddit at r/thisweekinretro to suggest and vote on the stories we cover on the show. Please give us a like and subscribe to help us reach new viewers.
If you enjoy our show and would like to support it, then please check out the link to our Patreon page in the show notes or description. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time for more up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.